Good day, everyone, again. We're happy to have everyone here with us today. We certainly hope that you've been enjoying WellVerse 2023 thus far in day one. We have a very special panel that we're about to have here live. Go out, send a message, send a tweet, send a Facebook message, tell a friend. We're about to explore under the banner of education, wellness, and the metaverse, a bit of AI and other emerging technologies. We see all of you here. There's so many of you here on GatherVerse.live. We have a few of our well and trusted, always there chat stream members on YouTube, many of you on Facebook and on Twitter, and a few of you on LinkedIn. We greet all of you from wherever you're from. As mentioned earlier, today we will not be unveiling a new headset or a new large language foundational model. But today we meet at the intersection of wellness and humanity, and wellness and technology, because we at GatherVerse find it just that important. Today, we're going towards a different direction. Shall we begin? So we bring up our panelists that are with us today. We're happy to have each of you that has come to attend with us. We have Dr. Messina Morris comes to us, Metaverse United CEO and Metaversity Director, Morehouse College. Dr. Swati Varanasi, Chief Scientific Officer, Element Apothic, and Alan Olson Orteco comes to us from Studio Bahia. And we have Dr. Janab, who is a valued member of our GatherVerse community, just like each and every member that's with us today. We're so excited to have all of you. We have much ground to cover. And shall we begin? We'll pick this up with Dr. Janab. I have to ask, when we think about where we're at with the prevailing technologies that are here on the horizon and that have come to meet us at our door, from your lens and all that you're working on, under the banner of education, what is the thing that may trouble you the most when it comes to the disruption therein, and how critically important might we be looking at the intersection of wellness that is now needed for this disruption that has reached our shores?
All right. So you said the thing that concerns me the most about where we're at with education in the metaverse?
The absolute most.
Yeah. I would say just increasing our awareness of where we are, like everyone being able to understand that we're in a new time, right? So understanding where your students are, especially in education, and bridging that gap. I see a big disconnect between education of the past and education of where we are now, where students are now, where we need to be going. And that's one of the things that really troubles me the most, that I'm always trying to learn how to bridge that gap.
Indeed. And Dr. Morris, you know all about bridging that gap. You're on the forefront, probably having some of the most advanced opportunities and experiences under the banner of education when it comes to virtual and augmented reality and mixed reality technology. And you also work with students and you work with whole entire companies and corporations, guiding them towards this next step of education. What are you seeing from your lens at the intersection of education and wellness when it comes to the metaverse?
That we don't take enough time to make sure that our students are whole, that they know we care about their entire selves, and that in order to be good at anything, to be great at anything, to be excellent at anything, you must really be self aware. So I spend a lot of time helping not just my students, but other organizations that I work with really define who they are, really taking apart layer by layer exactly who you are, what you're wanting to achieve, and how will you do that? And how will you do that more authentically and organically? Like, what is going to really drive you towards that place, your final destination? And what do you already have? Like, what are your strengths, but then what are your weaknesses too? Like, so a lot of students don't even know how they study or how they learn best. So, but they can't even show up as their best selves because they're so anxious about being assessed. So, getting them comfortable with understanding who they are so that assessment looks a lot like showcasing all of your gifts and talents versus someone picking you apart is a mindset shift. And so helping students be able to do that more easily, more readily means that we have to pay more attention to helping them practice mindfulness, that we bring all of those kinds of tools that work in the real world in terms of mental health awareness and healing. You bring that to the classroom and you'll be surprised. We do a mindful minute every morning before we start class, and just that shift into the space allows students to be fully present, to learn about the molecular world if we're teaching chemistry, to learn about how they should show up as educators if I'm in an education class. But it's really important for everybody to be their own authentic selves, because the gifts and talents that you have, that you're harnessing and you're afraid to display because of fear, is what's going to keep our world stagnant. And we need to be thinking about how we're going to transform our futures.
Absolutely, and indeed, and thank you for sharing this, Dr. Morris. And as the Dr. Janak just expressed, that we have this gap, this differential, this distance between
Yeah.
those who know and those who don't know, those who have adopted and those who haven't adopted, Dr. Varanasi. But the question that really just sits at the forefront of what's already been expressed in this panel is why? Why should we be adopting? Is this geared towards human betterment? Is there a reason to take on another new thing? And before you answer that, audience, we're here. Has AI already disrupted your life when it comes to adoption? When it comes to disruption, we tend to sometimes look at disruption as a bad thing. Oftentimes, it also could be a healthy thing to shed, if you will, from the cocoon to be able to ensue flight from that box that Janaea Barnes spoke about earlier, freeing ourselves from this box to a new and better thing. Dr. Varanasi, to this technology, to the audience, what role does these emerging technologies play when it comes to human betterment from your lens and the things that you're doing at Element Apothic?
I mean, there's so many things to say about that. I mean, I think that we need to be at the forefront. And at this point, the forefront really is the incorporation of education when it comes to the metaverse and looking at different strategies and ways we can implement these strategies. The way that I look at education really is focused on both the consumer side as well as the provider side. I'm an integrative health by trade, integrative health pharmacist by trade. So to me, it really is about how can I help patients and providers feel like the best version of themselves? Is this through products? Is this through education? Or really is it through a combination? And so I think we need to stay on the forefront of what's new, what's exciting, and also where consumers and providers are already looking to and use some of these platforms and opportunities for education. So I think, even if we're talking about AI and using that as the first step, I mean, I think about, some of the content that we're putting out to educate consumers and the materials that we're putting out to educate healthcare providers. And we're already incorporating AI. So I think is that the first step? Yes. But I think that there's so much more we can do. And a lot of that, too, when it comes to education, and from my perspective, is meeting the consumer where they're at. And if the consumer's already interested, they're already asking these questions, they're already looking to some of these resources, then we should meet them there and then take them even further with more information.
Indeed. And thank you for sharing, Dr. Varanasi. And Alan, I'm bringing you up now. You have done very unconventional exploration when it comes to these technologies and what it does for humanity, whether it's on the educational side or whether we're looking for those that have been involved in conflict, our youth that Dr. Morris talks about, our youth, our young people, our new next generations that are adopting these things that we are building, that we are making. And we're almost saying, if you will, Dr. Janak, that, hey, here, this is for you. But when I think about that disconnect, that gap that Dr. Janak expresses and speaks about, it's a lens of multi-generational observation. and understanding, is this something that they made for their generation, or did they make this for my generation also? I know that Dr. Morris knows all about that, but Alan, I want you to share with us today from your experiences and adventures in going into paths least taken, if you will. What are you looking at under the banner of this? Your mic, sir.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you. We at Studio Bay, we're a nonprofit, so we started in refugee camps. So we look for low barrier of entry technologies, affordable. And we started off in a refugee camp because there was a mental health crisis and children in crises. But now we have one in the United States with youth mental health. And so we're working with different partners across society. We're doing, for example, initiatives supported by Oprah Winfrey, initiatives out of universities and hospitals. And just recently, just to throw this out, we met with Mozilla Hubs, which is used by educators, and they have a new business service that allows up to 400 people to come in. It's $300 a month. It's low barrier of entry. And we're finding a lot of different clients for this use. Specifically, we found addiction space. We found a lot of people don't go to these addiction groups because they don't want to show their face. So if you have them come in through like Mozilla Hubs as an avatar, they can come into support systems like gambling addictions, hoarding. I know my mother hoards art like crazy. I think she should she should come into one of these groups. But the problem is that they have to go to a church and show their face.
Yeah.
And if you have them come in as avatars, low barrier of entry, you're able to have twice as many people seek help. And so we do very specialized productions for Stanford, NHS in the UK, Harvard. We do, very special, but we also are always implementing things for clients on a low cost, low barrier of entry so that we can reach out to the most people who need help.
Indeed, when we talk about bridging the gap, it's manifold, isn't it? We talk about financial accessibility. We talk about disabled accessibility. We talk about accessibility and cultural disconnection, cultural accessibility to understand whether this is meant for not just my generation, but for my culture. Is this built for me as a man, me as a woman, me as any gender, if you will, in this world, any community of color, if you will, in this world? Dr. Morris, I'm coming back to you real quick, and then we're going to go to you, Dr. Janak, and I want you to follow up with this. But Dr. Morris, on the other side of things, let's get to it. Let's roll up some sleeves here and say, okay, there was a time where we talked about people can adopt these technologies. Yeah. They're adopting. It's happened. There are a few use cases out there to let us know the impact. And so this is one of the reasons, everyone that's here with us today, you're coming from GatherVerse.live or one of our several other different streams, we need real-time information from those that are in the field that are chopping this type of wood, Dr. Varanasi. Dr. Morris, is this technology living up to the best of its promises? And where might you think or believe that we're headed with the adoption of these technologies? And is there room for more, for growth?
There's always room for growth. We don't have enough people who are actually committed to doing this work. So always open to collaborations, always open to new, exciting, innovative ideas as to how we are supposed to shape our future using these technologies. One of the most exciting things that I think has happened at Morehouse, besides us now offering over 33 virtual reality courses in academia, but has been the metaverse experiences. So by experiences, I mean, in 2020, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, all of these things happened, but COVID was happening. Omicron had disrupted our campus life again, and our HBCUs were being bombed, and bomb threats were happening. And so we were on lockdown, shelter in place. We couldn't gather. And that can take a toll on your mental health. Remember, college campuses are a place where our young people live. That is not just a place that they go and work and then go home. They actually live there. And so when their space becomes threatened by violence or hatred or people's ignorance, that can take a toll. And so for me, it was most important. I'm a boy mom, I have 5 sons. At Morehouse, is 2,200 young Black men there. So this is personal for me. And I know we can push academia all we want, but if you're not whole and you're not healing, you're not showing up as your best self. So we started doing meditation Mondays in the metaverse. I knew that in order for our students to persist in their majors, they needed an outlet. Black men don't always have an opportunity to say, "Hey, I'm hurting. I need to talk to someone." And I was so shocked that students would get up at 6 a.m. to meet with me just for a word of encouragement to start their week, to just sit and be heard about the things that they were dealing with. And when people say, men in general are they don't communicate, or they're not being asked to communicate in a way that feels authentic to them. And so giving my students room for me not to be running the sessions but just to be facilitating it, I allowed me to see their own expression of the hurt and pain they felt. I felt like one of the most powerful things that happened was we were doing a artistic meditation session. So we have like 3D pens in this environment. We have a digital twin of Morehouse that was built by Victory XR EdTech partners. And one of the students was using a 3D pen, and we were just listening to some Zen music and having them express themselves. One of my students did something that was so amazing to me, and I still do it when I display the demo of the campus. They just walked around with the 3D pen like in 45-degree angles. But eventually, like, this turned into a cage, and he said, "This is how I feel." And it's like him inside this 3D cage of all these colors, and it's like all this stuff that is happening around him, but inside he felt really locked in. And he showed how being in this environment helped him feel like he was free from that cage. So, like, just the way he would have never been able to express that on paper and 2D, but to actually visually see a representation of the pain that these young men actually feel was really important. It made me start really saying we got to pay more attention to their mental health. So why are 60% of young Black men dying by suicide and homicide between the ages of 18 to 23 in 2020? A lot of it has to do with them feeling locked in a cage that they can't get out of, and the outside world is so busy doing their thing that they don't hear them screaming out for help, and that trauma stays with them. And so in order for us to be a whole society, and Black men being head of their households, we got to make sure that if they're going to be head of their households, that they're whole from the inside out. And so those things are still very much so important. And so we need people who are willing to allow us to explore these areas of wellness outside of, oh, it's just rigorous academics, because we're really trying to build a better future. A better future looks like a whole healed humanity. And that means that these young Black men also need to be a part of that conversation.
Indeed. Thank you, Dr. Morris, for sharing that. It reminds me of just how artists, through the ages and dispensations of time, if you will, would express their hurt and sorrow and depression, if you will, through artistic works that they would make and that they would show, and how it would reflect. And we would use that really to some degree as an archetype visualization of someone's manifested expression of the sorrow that they have within. Dr. Janak, I want to take it to a very different level at the moment, but in line with where we're going. You have a lot of stripes on the wall, if you will, and accomplishments and things that you have done and things that you are doing. Help me to make sense to our youth, to our younger generations, and our more mature generations, and those who don't operate within this sandbox that we operate when it comes to technology. On one hand, we have large language foundational models that are taking the world, the working world, the educational world by storm. This time last year, none of us were talking about AI in the way that we were. Many of us were talking about the metaverse, as we yet still should. That hasn't left, but a big shadow of a mountain came next to it, if you will, ecologically in this garden, called artificial intelligence, this generative pre-trained transformers. I don't want to put so much emphasis on the technology, as there are many technologists, as many of us talk about this in our daily dealings and lives. What I want to focus on is, and so in line with what Dr. Morris just expressed, Dr. Janak, is how do we navigate these roads that we enjoy no blueprint for,
Yep.
and we've never been this way before,
Yeah.
but we have the demand and the expectation of what generation after generation has had, if not even more, on our shoulders. How do we go about navigating these new roads?
Wow, that's a great question. The things that come to mind, and I'll think about the things I tell my students about how we got through the past few years, is one, to learn to become your authentic self. When things are going around you and it seems like a spiral, I believe that when you center yourself, and that's by learning who you are, and just instead of becoming dizzy with everything else, you kind of center yourself and learn where things are falling. And so I just think that's the best way to go about doing that. Centering yourself instead of getting caught up, because when you get caught up into all the multiple things that are going around in the metaverse, on the internet, and so on, you become dizzy. And so I just use that as a metaphor, like, I want to be centered to know where to go at the best time.
Yep.
And so becoming your authentic self, learning how to express yourself in whatever is going on, and learning how to be you in whatever situation is going on, I feel is one of the best ways to get through tumultuous times, and to learn how to embrace changes, like to know change is coming. It's it's how we move forward as society, is by embracing change. So know it's coming, and learn where you are going to land when everything falls, because when things start and they disrupt you, it feels chaotic, and we can't really do much when we feel chaotic. So by centering yourselves with breathing exercises like Anil just did before, and just sort of stepping back, is one of the best ways to get through it.
I find that so thematically striking, and quite apropos, your expressions, Dr. Janak, as to what has been expressed already in the beginning stages of this summit of WellVerse, if you will, when we talk about innovation starting from within. That what happens when the tens of thousands that have lost their career, the biggest companies you know of in the world, the ones you never even know of and never heard of, people are being displaced now. But what happens when I go back to look for the next opportunity and it's not there? Where someone says, you know what, I'm going to go back to school, but there's nothing to go back to school for, because AI has taken that next dream and vision that you have. So when I think about what you're expressing and what's been said earlier about innovation coming within, it seems to me that we're headed into a renaissance of innovation that starts here in the human heart.
Yeah.
Start off in the desktop, and the laptop, and the tablet, and the phone, and the HMD, and the devices, Dr. Morris. Dr. Varanasi, it's not going to start anywhere external to ourselves, because at some point we may have to go back into regenerative first principles of our own selves.
Absolutely.
How do I clear the slate to be able to begin building something that I've never built before? And how do I take advantage of these technologies that have disrupted my life, and to take advantage of it to be able to use it as a tool so that I may prosper towards something that has never been introduced to society before, that is hopefully sustainable to put roof over the head and food in the belly. Dr. Varanasi, I have a question for you under a banner of wellness. You work in that theater of wellness when it comes to the medical theater. My question is, with these sea change of disruption that has arrived to our shore, is knocking at our doors, Alan, Dr. Varanasi, who brings wellness to those that provide us wellness? Onefold, it's manifold, this question. And the second would ensue is, how are we taking a new approach as those that are first movers and innovators in building? What governed role responsibility have you found yourself in carrying towards moving this technology, hopefully in a healthy fashion, towards getting other large companies and small to make good decisions on what's next?
Yeah, I think this is a wonderful question. And I think so much of it goes back to what's already been said. And then I can, even build upon that there. So the first part is authenticity, as it's been mentioned, is what feels good to you. Because when you feel like the best version of yourself, then you can bring that to the world. And I often feel like, and I think many people would agree with this statement as well, that when you feel like the best version of you, oftentimes that's very much aligned with what's best for the world around you, as well as, the people around you, the environment around you. And so much of that speaks to this, big discussion of sustainability and greenwashing and all this stuff is super in vogue right now. But I do think that when we feel like the best version of us, then we can help the people around us and also help the planet as a whole. So I think that a lot of the beginning stages of, how we as, whether it's healthcare professionals helping patients or, whatever type of relationship, like symbiotic relationship that is, and even synergistic relationship, has to start from within. But I think that the next element of that, even farther than, just ourselves and being in our own sphere, is who we bring into that sphere and how we cultivate community. And so I think that, we need to figure out what resonates with us, but then how we can bring other people in and lift them up as we are lifting ourselves up. And so when we're doing this through education, I always talk about evidence-based education. So I'm always thinking about, what science is out there and what's an engaging, exciting way to articulate that to people around me and also to the greater community. And I understand as well, it's so important not just to go to the consumer or the patient, but it's so important as well to go to the healthcare professional where the consumers or patients are getting their information and where there's already that underlying sense of trust. And so if we can go to the source, whether the source is ourselves or the healthcare professional, and then relay that information, I really think that makes such a difference in the world.
Dr. Varanasi, is it a possibility, as a quick follow-up, is it a quite possibility in the very near future, not too far ahead, that when we talk about our health professionals, might we be referring to a large language foundational model rather than a human?
Yes, I definitely think so. And whether it's, or the human, I think it's more of a question of and the combination of the two.
What impacts might that have from your lens?
From my lens, it really is everyone and everything working together. If we realize that this is the new technology and this is where people are looking to get information and to seek community, then I think that we have to work as humans with the metaverse, with all these other platforms to figure out how we can all use it together for the best.
I really enjoyed that line. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Varanasi. Quite appropriate. Alan, when we talk about human centricity, you brought up something just earlier in the beginning of your discourse, if you will, when you talked about working with communities abroad, and let's say far from, let's say, here in North America, where many of us are here, and we're as innovate, certainly not limited, GatherVerse is to North American shores, and we're not approaching this discussion with the North American bias, if you will. But we talk about refugee camps. That's certainly something that we tend not to hear about here in this country yet. It is a reality. It is a reality when we start to look at every single continent on the face of this planet is impacted with depression, is impacted with poverty and stricken conditions. And the reality is that governments will only ever be able to do so much, Dr. Morris, and they will only be able to provide so much help and resources. And going back to what Dr. Varanasi said, she talked about the power of community healing and contribution and wellness. Alan, I want you to take it from your lens of experience, not at the university level. Let's get off the college campus for a second, can we? I want you to talk about from when you're working in these camps, when you're working with these mass communities, how does community take adoption towards self-sustaining itself and innovating in using, when they do get these resources, when they do receive that, how do they champion that forward so that they become independent?
Thank you. Great question. We work in different camps. In Africa, we work in the Rhino refugee camp, in the Middle East as well. And so some of the approach we take is an indigenous psychology approach, which is it comes from within the community, the solutions, as opposed to kind of a neo-colonialist approach where you impose all sorts of Western practices that don't even work on us, and we try to impose them on somebody else. So there's a lot of Eurocentricity, very predominant throughout, especially from the Europeans, but by extension, us in North America, we borrow these neo-colonialist practices, which are, they don't work on us. And so why are we exporting this sort of thing? And so you see that a lot in the development context, where actually our work started because the United Nations kept sending in these European psychologists into refugee camps. And these refugees don't have the tradition of speaking their most intimate problems with a stranger. So that's not part of their culture. And then if they got together in a group therapy setting, they wouldn't speak, the women wouldn't speak if there was a man present, or they wouldn't speak because of different tribal or socioeconomic levels. And so that's the United Nations trying to impose a certain type of psychological practices common to Europeans and North Americans. At the same time, so we decided to go with the nonverbal Google Cardboard embodied form of therapy. And so we actually, we manufacture VR headsets that come inside of this little cute lunch case. And we do a very low cost approach. Our manufacturing is $8. And so we take an embodied approach without language, words, and numbers. And if you look around the world, most people, I've lived in 10 countries. I backpacked 80 countries. I'm very lucky. My father designed and built US embassies all over the world. And my mother's from Latin America. And so I grew up in regions that were very embodied. Latin America, Africa, we live very embodied lives. And so that's a huge plus. You know, if you walk to the factory, you walk to the market, this is a very embodied form of living. It's very healthy. And so they're way ahead of us when they come to design, and they're very good at, people in refugee camps are very good at judging a virtual reality experience. They can tell you this is not good design. This isn't very embodied. This doesn't feel very natural. And if you grow up in those settings, it's kind of, you're a very embodied person. You live in the environment. You're probably the best judge of virtual reality anybody could ever find. So we learn a lot. I work with 6 women with PhDs in VR. I'm a PhD candidate, and we're a flat organization. So we try to democratically work decisions out inside of the Studio Bahia. But we also reflect that inside of how we implement indigenous psychology. And indigenous psychology works through workshops in the local community to extract different narratives, their own myths, to be able to find their own healing solutions. And so we take a bottom-up approach, even within Studio Bahia, the way we operate.
Certainly a bit of agency within that. And thank you for sharing with us, Alan, about those headsets too. You do realize you're obliged to send each of us ones for the shameless plug for the $8.
I'm definitely sending everybody, we're sending a dozen to each of you, actually.
I'll take a couple myself. On a different note, you talked about backpacking and the experience of exploration of land, of nature. I myself have been backpacking in Europe throughout and seeing the Julian Alps, the French Alps, the Swiss Alps, the Austrian Alps, the Dolomites, if you will, of Italy, and how beautiful and lovely it is. My knees hurt. I can't imagine doing 80. But Dr. Morris, I think about something. I had an opportunity to visit with you on a very lovely campus in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes, you did.
I remember it was a powerful experience that I had, Dr. Janak and Dr. Veronesi and Alan, that when Dr. Morris showed me a part of their campus, there was such a familiarity with what I was seeing, and I realized that I had saw it in VR first a few years ago, it feels like. And then here I am in real time, having arrived to this campus. I said all that to say that when we think about the land, the nature, we think about this world, this beautiful world, even with all the depression and the sadness, the sorrow and warfare, if you will, there's something so intimate about the things that are around us. They're grown in nature, if you will. And it made me consider that with technology, we don't use technology to help us to, if you will, identify and understand nature. We use nature to help us identify and understand what we might build with technology through the artistic, inherent, natural experience of nature itself, never the other way around. I realized that AI and the metaverse can only duplicate so much. It can only show so much compared to what we have that's always been here. Um, True innovation, if you will, that we've been born into. Dr. Morris, on a very intimate level, we are extending reality.
Correct.
Are we doing a good job at it?
We could do better. We could do better. And I say that because there are still communities that are isolated from using this technology that could benefit from it, but could also give so much to this conversation. So let's say, for instance, I'm an autism mom, have two sons diagnosed with autism, but one that has moderate support needs. I don't feel like his community is always considered in terms of what the needs and necessities are. We have about a third of our students that need certain specialized services on the campus of Morehouse. So I don't think that all of their needs are being met by the technology or by, just the world in general. So we need to start thinking about accessibility in terms of like who's being excluded, truly who's being excluded from these conversations about what they need. And that's why we need more people to actually chime in on where are the gaps. I know people think in terms of, okay, so mental health or mindfulness practice or those kind of things, fitness. But I'm thinking in terms of just spirituality, just in terms of presence, in terms of inclusion. But okay, now that you're included in the conversation, do you feel like you belong? How can we create a sense of belonging for young people, for even adults? Right now, how do we get educators to think that this technology is useful for what they are trying to do in terms of educating students? They don't need another thing that they have to push uphill alone. They need community, they need supports, and looking at how we can actually. So, you talked about the bottom up approach, Alan, and I always talk about people using, administrators, that top down approach. They always mandate for educators to do something. Bottom up, we always look at the students and how can we help them. Nobody looks at the educator who has to show up 40 to 60 hours a week present with your child all day long. Who is raising your child? Who is raising the next generation? What's the educators? What are we doing for them for wellness? So I could tell you what we've done in terms of educator wellness training is trying to provide them with an opportunity to just sit with the technology in terms of mindfulness practice, using different applications on VR to be able to just help them work on healing themselves from the inside out of having to be present during all of these transitions that have happened. How can we make sure that we are recognizing that the educator is the one that is in the trenches with your child day in and day out? And if they're not whole, then your child isn't going to be whole. You wonder why we have ninth graders that cannot read. How do they get to ninth grade?
Sure.
Because you have to keep passing them along, but someone was not able to even pay attention. When you're so busy dealing with different issues, you can't even pay attention and be focused on what's really going on. And we can't have an illiterate society. We're talking about technologically literate, we're talking about scientifically literate, We're talking about what just happened in our world over the past few years. We are not pandemic safe yet, everyone, but no one understands what's really happening on a molecular front and how we can prevent these type of things from happening. Want to look at the economics of it all, but the truth of the matter is people are tired. People are burnt out. People need security. People need to feel safe. They need to be heard and they need to be seen. But that's not what's really going on right now. And whether we like it or not, it starts in the schools. It really does, because that's where the majority of our young people are being shaped and formed into who they're going to be. By the time they get home to their parents, it's bedtime, bath time, sleep time. They don't, you get raised the 40 to 50 hours during the week. That's why wellness in schools are important, but that's why wellness on your jobs are also equally important. That's why organizations and corporations and nonprofits and wherever we are showing up as human beings during the day, we need to be practicing and having the foresight to think about ways in which we're going to be healthier. Because sitting in front of a desk all day for 40 hours, 50 hours, that's not good for us. Being on these blue screens, that's not healthy for us. Being able to take a bathroom break is though. You know what I mean? And we don't even prioritize those kinds of things. So we have a long way to go in terms of just emerging technologies, but just in terms of what do we constitute as wellness as a whole, as a world? And it's not the grind culture. We got to let that go, because we're not whole enough to even create a better world if we're sitting in our own stuff. So,
I find that very fascinating when you said it's not the grind culture. Then it leads the question, what is? Dr. Varanasi, I'm turning the page to you, and Dr. Janat, we're headed your way. I'm very intentional in what I'm about to ask to both of you. Dr. Varanasi, you speak at several different universities, you guest lecture. You are a very rare person that helps the transition people's whole lives, their career settings, alternative career settings, different approaches, where they might go, even a little bit under the consideration of not just transitioning into a career or startup culture, but how you go about it along the way of nutrition, what we take in, what we ingest every single day that it takes to get to these steps. We often see the success of others, but we often do not see the path that they had to take to get there. And sure enough, in this present time, we're all going to new roads that no one's been, as we've already discussed. We're heading into a path, into an unknown forest, if you will. There are many people afraid. But as it was expressed this morning, it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to say, I'm not well. I'm not right. I need help. It's okay to say that, should not be taboo. As somebody that's holding the hand, if you will, to cohorts of communities, that you would go to Morehouse, if you will, and the ones that Dr. Morris has been building and helping to ensure the next step, that you would be the person to say, come with me, if you will, to that place. What would help equip you to make this process more feasible? And are you getting enough to be able to help with the transition of how arduous I can only imagine this is?
Wow, what a question. So, I mean, for me, it really is thinking about what is the future and how can I help arm the next generation with how, they can approach being successful in this new future. And so whether it's the advent of AI or looking at the metaverse, whether it's looking at how healthcare is changing, how can I help be a force in that to help people that are now in school and training to be a part of this new world? So I think there's so much to be done. And I think that there's also so many opportunities for education, whether the education is in person or it is through the metaverse. We need to figure out how we can help students and how we can help the next generation of professionals and people of the world. And so a lot of the strategies that I've used thus far really is outreach, whether it's outreach to universities or universities reaching out to me and talking about, maybe not approaching it with such a narrow-minded perspective. And I feel like that is something within the medical sphere that's too common, that there is a certain way that we've done things and maybe a certain way that things should be done, should with quotes, of course, but that there's so many other potential opportunities. So as someone who grew up around the use of herbs and Ayurveda, we use that just as often as we used over-the-counter prescriptions, and we use that just as often as we used prescriptions and homeopathy. So to me, I always saw healing, health, and wellness as this multifaceted thing that, you know, we can use all these potential options and think about at the end of the day what works best for the student, or what works best for the patient, what works best for the provider. And that's what I call patient-centered shared decision-making. But it's not just specific to patients. It's also specific to this next generation in general. How can we work with them as a team and work with them to provide all these different strategies and see which ones really resonate with them and which ones are going to help them feel like the best version of themselves. It's not, you know, everyone needs this one modality, because, you know, let's say, for example, wellness, I think, especially within the consumer culture right now, has this certain perspective. And even mindfulness and meditation, I have so many people and patients I've worked with over the years that are like, I don't have, you know, the time to sit for 30 minutes on my meditation pillow that I bought for $100, you know, and they have this perspective that meditation and mindfulness has to be this whole ordeal. Whereas I love, Dr. Morse, that you mentioned the idea of the mindful minute. That's something I talk about, not in that exact terminology, but I call it the mindful moment. But I think that there's so many other ways, whether it's, you know, taking your dog on a walk, it's going to the grocery store, and just pausing for a moment has so much value without becoming like, or making it this huge thing and huge scenario and a huge thing that you need to pencil off on your calendar. It really can just be that moment, and how these little moments all add up to make such a huge difference.
Very powerful. I sit here and think, I hope the working world and audience, all of you that are with us on GatherVerse.live, will take some of these moments to pass on a mindfulness minute, if you will, to your colleagues, because we work in a hybrid world now, don't we? Being that we've become more virtual in the past 32 months than we have the past 32 years, being that we have remote distributed workforces that are working from their living rooms and product delivery teams that are working from their bedrooms, if you will, that takes us away from community. It interacts us, and it brings us to interaction of community in a new manifestation virtually, a digital thing that we're interacting with. And we've been interacting with it for a few years now. Who would have thought that we would be living the lives that we live right now? Dr. Janak, I have an itch, and I need you to help me scratch it, please. What do we say to those in transition, primarily our youth? I want to talk to the youth. Audience, can we talk to our youth for a moment, please? I don't know what to say to them. I mentor many people, many students, different backgrounds, different countries, different ages. Some of them are going through a really tough time. There's only so many words I have. I know that this is part of your daily dealing. How do I, in the terms of keeping it real with them, because we're in a time where they need honest information, not just information. I believe now is the time to be candid. I don't want them to tell them to go pick up a book and read. I want to give them something from my heart. And when I look in my heart, sometimes I just don't have enough to give them about this new world that they're heading into, that we as adults here have been able to navigate so far, thankfully, even on a monocle level, successfully. But that's not the story for everyone, even for those that are part of our GatherVerse community. Dr. Janat, what do we say to the generations to come, the generations that are listening, that are here present? There are many people with GatherVerse.live now. What do you say to them on how do I navigate this new world that I find myself in? What are the best ways to keep myself healthy, yet steer towards an avenue and a path of sustainable success?
Yeah, great question. And I must add, Christopher, I've loved all of your questions today. I think everybody has. For one, I go with what you say, being honest with them. Like, we've created something that's messed up for you. I tell my students all the time, this is a problem we've created for you to fix, for one. So acknowledging that, yeah, what they're perceiving is right. Validating their perceptions of what the world is like, because a lot of the time people think, you're young, you don't understand, but they do understand, and they understand at a different level, and they have a lot to offer. So letting them know that, yeah, we're not this. We grew up in a time, I believe, where everybody made it seem like, they had it all together. But I think for one now, just saying, okay, no, we haven't had it all together, and I think they're definitely seeing that, with protests and so on happening. So starting there, and then letting them know that they have something they can contribute. Like, everyone has something valuable that they can bring to the table, and giving them examples of times when the youth have innovative change. One of the things I often tell students about, like, everybody knows about the civil rights movement, but letting them know there's a great film called The Children's March, which details the fact that it was children that catalyzed and was a catalyst for the signing of the Civil Rights Act. It was those pictures of children being hosed down in the national global arena that sort of spurred us towards that, legal change. So giving them those examples of where the youth really did matter, and where youth can make phenomenal changes. So sort of empowering them that, yeah, we've done what we've done, and we've gotten here, but you are the ones that are sort of ready, prepare them to take the reins, and educating them in that way. Like, we're educating you, you're going to be the policymakers in the future.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Janang. Alan, we're coming up with you, and then we're doing one last minute rapid fire round before our time has expired. But audience, I want you to say, and for our YouTube community out there that's on the chat, what do you say to the youth? What do you tell them? What are you saying to them from your heart? Let us know. We in this community, we share, and we want good information that we can relay to others. Alan, Dr. Janang talked about the civil rights movement, which, for those listening and familiar, that's akin here to North America. But you've been through so many different countries where they've had different movements that we have no idea. And we often find ourselves affixed to where we're at and to what we know based on what we see and what's around us. But the world is much bigger than most of us, I think, may have appreciation for. And maybe we've come to realize that through our travels, if you will, and different people, whether we live in a very transient community, from folks coming from all different places around the world. How do we right now look past what's in front of us, Alan? How do we take the next approach towards what we innovate today, not just for our communities, but for the world? How do we see further today?
Thank you for that question. I might not be the best person because I did have like a dark night of the soul. So I mean, I realized the AI rendered my past companies and my past jobs, redundant. Basically, made them redundant. And so the last few months with our team, we've been looking at how AI is going to create generative worlds. And we're seeing this already coming. So we're looking at how can we begin to curate these generative worlds. Right now, we're just looking at, ChatGPT, Mid-Journey, but those things are going to merge, and we're already seeing 3D worlds. And so we actually have to keep up with the changes. And we thought that would be 3 to 5 years. We're looking at 6 to 12 months. And so the question for our team is, how do we begin to curate certain experiences that lend to certain psychological outcomes? And the first research project we're doing relates to a spiritual pathway to enlightenment that comes out of Kashmir, medieval Kashmir. It's called Kashmir Shaivism. So it's a monistic approach as opposed to a dualist approach that you find in Buddhism, Christianity, and Hinduism as well. And a monistic approach, because it can be translated in monistic approach, means that it's about making this world like heaven. And so that's where we look at a project of where we're going, generative worlds prompted, but curated by certain teams, and we look at it and we think of a spiritual pathway or pathway to greater good and wellness. And so as a team, we're projecting ourselves in that direction using probably one of the most sophisticated systems of being ever conceived of, which is Kashmir Shaikhism out of the Middle Age India. Most of us religiously, we come from dualist religions in which there's always a heaven to go to, or this world is an illusion, right? The Hindus. But we looked for something that was monistic, in which this world in itself is beautiful, and we make it beautiful. There's no escape clause. And so that's the first project we're looking at as curating for generative worlds in virtual reality. So on a personal level, I went through a dark night of the soul because I had to realize this is significant. There is no going back. And at the team level, we looked at projecting ourselves forward so that we can curate these experiences so that there's no violence in those experiences, so that our youth don't just have violent options. They have caring communities of collaboration and healing. And so thank you for that question.
Of course, and thank you for the answer. And I must ask, because it would just be inappropriate not to ask Dr. Morris, Dr. Varanasi, and Dr. Janak real quick, the work you're doing, and of course, Alan, but I want to get to our three doctors here before we conclude. You're doing servants work. The work you're doing often goes underappreciated. I'd like to think that you have a friend here in the GatherVerse community. And for those that are with us, we want to support our educators for what they give, just like we support our servicemen and women, if you will, or front line, if you will. Dr. Morris, Dr. Varanasi, Dr. Janak, I have to ask, is there anything that we can do to help you in your way? Dr. Morris, we'll start with you. We'll quickly go to Dr. Varanasi and Dr. Janak.
It will be well with my soul if I can sit as a board member on some of these large tech companies' boards to really give a different, diverse opinion as to what's going on for the future of work, but what's going on to help them inform about like who are the next generation of workers and what's missing in the schools and where can they close the gaps. So I'm open to all of those opportunities because that would be a way that I know I can make impact, but also funding. I mean, we need funding. Our HBCU campuses are crumbling. And while it's nice to talk about emerging technologies, if you don't have a safe place to store it or innovation center for students to be able to explore it, or you don't have a lot of other things, so you're just trying to keep the lights on, then that's a struggle. So yes, we do have a lot of opportunities, but it doesn't always trickle down to the programming level that it needs to because they're putting out other fires. So definitely support in terms of ways of funding, in terms of how you find me, unitethemetaverse.com, so that I can help you figure out where you belong. But you can also utilize me as a subject matter expert, as somebody boots on the ground that has done this work and understands the necessity for us to do this work aware, with a certain level of awareness and joy. So let's not be so serious about it. Like seriously, like I'm trying to bring the joy back to your organization because this is what it did for me. Created opportunities for me, for my students, for my other fellow faculty members and colleagues to have a community that is a part of our own healing journey. So there is joy here. So
Indeed.
reach out to me for joy.
Thank you, Dr. Morris, Dr. Varanasi.
Well, I love that answer. I'd love to echo the same sentiment that there's so much potential here, and it really is about banding together, figuring how we can support each other, whether that is support through, networking connections, through speaking engagements, but also opportunities and funding as well. There's a terrible, saying that education doesn't get funded or there's no money in education. And I think we need to work together to change that so people don't say that anymore and that we can really use education as a tool.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Varanasi. Dr. Janak.
Dr. Morris and Dr. Varanasi said it all, really. I echo it. collaboration, really definitely more collaboration, more hands-on, showing, bridging the tech with the practice on the groundwork, definitely.
Thank you for giving us your time. Thank you for sharing your expressions. Thank you for being transparent. Thank you for your vulnerability, for your servant leadership. We certainly have benefited from this discussion on the metaverse and wellness here at WellVerse 2023. We have an incredible panel that's getting ready to arrive at our shores in just one moment. Thank you.
Thank you.